Okay, we're back with Charlie Fez, and we're going to talk briefly about when Charlie first met Linda McMahon, and when Lou was...
not when I met her.
Oh, okay.
No. When Lou and I were together, and this is part of the history that I was actually there to see, Lou promoted some matches in Kuwait. And this started with Nick Gulas, which should have been our first clue to stay away from it. Nick approached Lou to put together a tour to go to Kuwait. And Lou had just seen the Funk Brothers, and they weren't working. And he was concerned. I mean, he'd known those boys their whole lives. He was friends with their father.
Terry and Dory Jr.?
Terry and Dory Jr. So I opened my big mouth because I don't know anything about wrestling, and I should have never said anything. And I said, Lou, why don't you book Terry and Dory on this match? So we called them.
What year was that? Had Terry already gone through all his hardcore stuff?
I am trying to think when Kuwait was.
Well, it was
Lou
Kuwait.
and I were married.
The war, that war was 91, 92. First...
When did the...
Desert Shield, Desert Storm?
No. This was just before the TWA flight was hijacked.
Oh, okay.
So I'm trying to think, that was the early 80s maybe?
Oh, so this was way prior to the Desert Storm.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because you mentioned Kuwait, I thought it was after Desert Storm.
No.
Okay.
Lou put together a great group of guys for the tour. And I mean, the Butcher,
Abdullah the Butcher, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Who would have been big at that time? Snuka?
Snuka went with Crockett.
Yeah.
Later on. But I'm trying to think of his name. I always called him Granny because he would call me every day with something else that I need to watch out for. Stan Hansen.
Stan Hansen,
what
yeah.
a sweetheart. Stan went...
Was Stan a sweetheart in real life? Because his character was a heel,
Stan is a sweetheart in real life. But, you know, Lou was in his element. He was enjoying it. We had the trip all booked. I was doing the paperwork.
Stan Hansen was huge in Japan.
And we were trying to get in touch with, Lou was trying to get in touch with Dory to let him know that there'd been a date change. They had to leave a day early or a day later. It was like 2 weeks before the trip. Long story short, he gets a phone call from their attorney saying that they're not going. Now, everything's been booked. Lou has had to sell them to Kuwait because they'd never heard of them. And, of course, they were top of the card, top money. Well, Lou was devastated. I mean, personally, he was devastated. Personally, I was thinking about taking out contracts on the two of them, but I didn't. But it really did hurt him. And it seemed that Crockett had offered them a contract, which of course had a huge loophole, and they got screwed in.
Crockett was big at that time in the early 80s.
Oh yeah. So, long story short, Lou got the Samoans.
Sika and Alpha?
They were no longer working for McMahon.
Now, there were a lot of Samoan wrestlers. Was that Sika and Alpha?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
And
it would have been in the 80s, it would have been Sika and Alpha, yeah.
So, you know, everything changed. They had coverage in Kuwait through the WWF tapes. So it was a good fit. I think it was a week before we were going to leave on the tour, WWF filed an injunction. And so, of course, we spent a lot of money on attorneys, is all I can tell you.
Yeah. And that involved Linda McMahon?
But the trip was artistically a success. I think that was Jim Barnett's term, financially a failure, but artistically a success.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a good experience for Lou. He was in his element. And they were supposed to go to Pakistan for a week. It was supposed to be 2 weeks. And that fell through. They had to either take Persian rugs or... They couldn't take Pakistani money out of the country, and they wouldn't pay them in the U.S. So
Did Lou ever talk about bringing pro wrestling to Norway and Sweden? Because Frankie Kane talked about that. He tried to do it because those countries are ripe for like a shoot-style pro wrestling.
I never heard anything about it, but what was so incredible about this trip and what was so emotional for Lou is he booked those guys for 2 weeks. He was responsible to them for 2 weeks. They stayed an extra 3 or 4 days in Kuwait and picked up some extra money. But not one of those guys expected Lou to pay them more. In fact, half of them came to Lou and said, you know, Lou, I don't really need all this money.
Oh, that's great.
It was probably the most rewarding thing I ever saw in those because of the affection and the mutual respect between Lou and the guys who went with him.
Yeah.
And of course, all of our profit went to attorneys. But it was really good.
Now, were you dealing with legal battles against Linda McMahon?
Against the McMahons.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Linda was the one behind it.
Was Vince Sr. out of it by that time?
Oh yeah. He was long gone. Yeah. But Linda was definitely the brains behind the whole maneuver, which was a brilliant maneuver. Fortunately,
I think she still
it didn't
is.
work.
Yeah.
Oh, I think so too.
Yeah.
You know, Lou went up for what they used to have TNT. He went up and did a show. It was really funny. I think Pat Patterson called him and asked him to come up.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I just got to sit outside and watch the whole thing. And Ivan Putski was there.
Yeah, Polish Power, yeah.
Yes, he was really interesting. He would sit when he was carrying on the conversation with you and make his pecs jump.
Oh, like this?
Yeah, and I wanted to say, Ivan, do you know I'm married to Luthez? But I didn't, because Ivan was a sweetheart.
Yeah.
It was an interesting adventure.
Yeah.
It definitely was.
Frankie Kane got him his name, Ivan Putski.
Well, Lou, I know I've met Frankie at some point, but I know that Lou was very fond of Frankie. And had a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, Frankie's gotten a lot of guys their gimmicks in wrestling. He got Ivan Putski. He gave him the Polish Power gimmick, and that really worked. Made him a lot of money. Now, next we're gonna talk in the next segment about St. Louis briefly and some of the wrestlers that came through there. Some of the wrestlers that were Lou's favorite that came through St. Louis.